Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now, this show is all about your opinion and mine. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or really should be on your agenda. So, with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. As MPs top up their earnings with lucrative sidelines, is it time to ban them from having second jobs? We'll have reaction from Westminster. Plus, was Sweden's risky COVID strategy perhaps right all along? The Swedes suffered fewer deaths than their neighbours despite not locking down. We're going to be analysing the stats. And it may not be on the top of the news agenda of traditional news outlets today, but we need to talk about online safety. Do you think social media harms you? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? You can, of course, email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's have a look at the news headlines with the wonderful Polly.
Good afternoon. Your GB News headlines at 4 o'clock. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has announced COVID jabs for frontline NHS England staff will be mandatory. Employees will have to be fully vaccinated by April 2022 unless they can prove they're exempt. Around 100,000 NHS workers haven't had their first dose yet. Sajid Javid says it's necessary to protect patients.
I'm mindful not only of our need to protect human life, but our imperative to protect the NHS and those services upon which we all rely. We must avoid preventable harm and protect patients in the NHS, protect colleagues in the NHS, and, of course, protect the NHS itself.
Well, care home workers in England have already been told they must have both jabs by this Thursday. Simon Wallace is clinical lead at St Cecilia's care home. He told GB News that staff had a duty of care to protect their patients, and the best way to do this is through vaccination. But he also said the workforce can't afford to lose any more staff.
People have seen that the complete unawareness of the government to recognise social care and the things that it does do, and it's just causing absolute problems with recruitment and retention. There's a massive void of people already for working within the care sector, and this is only going to make it worse. But then I also feel that the people that we look after need to be protected.
The Prime Minister's under increasing pressure to apologise for the Tory sleaze row. Cabinet Minister Stephen Barclay told MPs attempting to change standards rules to prevent Owen Paterson from being suspended was a mistake. Boris Johnson, who visited a Northumberland hospital yesterday, reportedly returned to London before the Commons debate on standards had finished, but decided not to take part. London Mayor Sadiq Khan criticised the PM for not wearing a mask during his hospital visit.
Somebody in a position of power and influence who is clearly an opinion former is in a hospital where there are clearly people who are unwell, not wearing a face mask. And what is noticeable is that those with the Prime Minister, the clinicians, the experts, the nurses, the doctors, the heroes, were wearing face masks. And wearing a face mask is the most unselfish thing you can do. And the fact that the Prime Minister wasn't wearing one speaks volumes.
Keir Starmer has visited the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's on the 17th day of his hunger strike, and said there must be a resolution to this case. Richard Ratcliffe wants the government to do more to secure the release of his wife, who's been detained in Iran for 5 years. The Foreign Office says it's doing all it can to get her home. Mr Ratcliffe told GB News the Prime Minister has to make good on his promise to bring her back.
Nazanin and others are being held over the UK government's debt. They need to resolve that debt dispute so that people can come home. And they really do need to challenge Iran on its hostage-taking. It doesn't make it safe to British citizens to do neither on both things. Certainly he's the Prime Minister, he's responsible for all of our safety, he's responsible for protecting all British citizens. I think my point to him is, he needs to take that responsibility seriously.
Tensions are rising on the Poland-Belarus border, where thousands of migrants are gathering. It comes a day after hundreds of people tried to break through the barriers, cutting barbed wire and cutting through fences. Polish security forces described the influx of migrants as a coordinated attempt to massively enter the territory, accusing the Belarusian government of launching a hybrid attack against the country. The UK government has pledged £165 million of funding for communities and women's groups impacted by climate change. The funding was announced as part of COP26 Summit's Gender Day. A 3.5-metre tall Syrian refugee puppet called Little Amal opened the session on advancing gender equality in climate action. The puppets travelled 5,000 miles through Europe and the UK to highlight the plight of refugees. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, told COP26 delegates that 80% of people displaced in climate change are women.
Addressing the rapidly changing climate is a matter of justice and equality with the most vulnerable, most affected, including Indigenous communities, less developed countries, and our focus today and every day on women.
And lastly, England and Manchester United striker Marcus Rashford has been awarded an MBE, and he's dedicated it to his mum. The 24-year-old was commended for his campaign last summer, working to ensure no vulnerable children went hungry. That resulted in the government changing its policy on free school meals vouchers during lockdown. The football star says he still has dreams he wants to accomplish. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour. Here's Alex.
You're with the Afternoon Agenda, and today we're talking about online safety. Move fast and break things. That was apparently Mark Zuckerberg's infamous motto when it came to the blistering pace of development in Silicon Valley. Those daring dot-com bros revolutionized the world by becoming the choreographers of our communication. Who we connect with, how we connect with them, and what we are connecting over. It all seemed like a blur of opportunity, an alternative Randian tech utopia where the limitations of human interaction could finally break physical, temporal, and linguistic boundaries, where the frontiers of freedom are being pushed to their limits, aided by artificial intelligence and algorithms to feed needs we didn't even know existed, generating new biopsychological pathways stimulated by compulsive engagement in rewarding on-screen stimuli, pushing our attachment to the platforms themselves deeper and deeper. Yet something else has taken place. By forging such addictive bonds to technology, are we conversely dehumanizing ourselves? Instead of a world of connections, are we doing the opposite and disconnecting from reality, from the truth, from each other? Have we moved so fast that we have severed some of the most abstract but essential bonds of humanity? Leaked internal documents from Facebook have revealed the extent to which the company is aware that its technology has potent and grave, insidious real-world implications, encouraging self-harm and suicide, favouring extreme, polarising content, distorting democratic determination through imbalanced promotion of unverified clickbait, spreading fake news, exploited for grooming and abuse, to harness and seed extremism, and availing itself to serious manipulation by criminals and hostile foreign actors, simultaneously building a parallel dark web where sinister and nefarious activities bubble just below the surface. Ushering in a whole new, untested meta-existence in uncharted virtual territory is leading to perverse reverberations in the realm of the real, such as an explosion in cosmetic procedures to look more like filtered avatars, dubbed selfie dysphoria. Yet because there has never been any form of metric to monitor the crossover effects of our online behaviour onto our daily lives, the full extent of the impact of social media consumption is hard to measure and perhaps woefully, dangerously underestimated. What is still a relatively new innovation, having existed a mere 17 years, has been allowed to develop, entirely unbridled and loosely monitored. We're only just beginning to realise the potential and significant harms in retrospect, while being forced to ask whether we can now put the genie back in the bottle. But it's not only the psychological impact we should be scared of. The sheer scale of potential monetization and manipulation of social media means that this extremely powerful resource can insert itself directly into your psyche and work surreptitiously to control your actions and attitudes. It can be used to harvest demographic information on an industrial scale, with platforms such as TikTok accused of being used by the Chinese Communist Party for mass surveillance and cyber intelligence. Facebook used to go by the slogan, "It's free and always will be." But if we aren't paying to use it, how has it amassed a $130 billion market value? Because you, dear viewer, are the thing on sale. You are the invaluable commodity, the most powerful resource on earth, a unit to buy things, to vote for things, to believe in things, and campaign for things. You are the vessel of commerce, with every click, every post, interaction, and piece of open source data up for grabs to shadowy figures who want to select you to commodify for future profits and inscrutable influence, regardless of the harm it may be doing to you, your community, your privacy, your security, and your sanity. With the UK Parliament currently taking evidence ahead of the formulation of the online safety bill, we could be one of the first countries in the West to broadly regulate social media, with only Germany and Australia attaching legal addendums on the most extreme harmful content online. But is clamping down on communications platforms akin to mass censorship and regulatory overreach and a threat to individual liberty? Or is it perilously long overdue? Today, we really need to talk about online safety. Let's talk first to cybersecurity expert and former senior military intelligence officer, Philip Ingram, MBE. Philip, fantastic to have you on. Now, what's interesting is we do often talk about the social media platforms as if they've already existed, as if they're a human right. They're free to download, they're by and large free to use unless you are a company. But are they really all about freedom?
Well, you summed it up very well in your introduction. They're not about freedom, they're about making money. And the Facebook revelations have shown that. And they make money by exploiting the people that they've got on there for free. You rightly highlighted that those people are the commodities. And therefore, Facebook manipulates the commodities to make sure that it is appealing to advertisers and others who want to pay for its services so that it can get the outputs from them to continue to grow that advertising revenue. It's very, very dangerous indeed.
And how can social media platforms be exploited by nefarious characters, by criminals, by hostile actors? I mean, we think we're just having a chit-chat with people we knew at university, but there is a sort of sinister underbelly to all of this that coexists and is constantly being built.
Well, it is, and it's very subtle. We all remember adverts from our childhoods, and I'll not compare your childhood to mine because mine was many years before yours. But you can remember those adverts, and they stimulate a thought in your mind, and they stimulate you understanding the product. Because what that's doing is it's stimulating what's called the feel-good quartet of different chemicals in your brain: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. And they make you feel, you get this nice, warm, tingly feeling down your back whenever you hear a comforting advert. The same thing happens whenever your personal beliefs and your arguments are being reinforced by what you're seeing in social media, by adverts that pop up that just happen to be related to products that you're interested in, or your best friend's interested in, and you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. All of that doesn't happen by accident. It's being designed. And you came up with some of the phraseology that there is behind it, but the wider psychodemographic profiling that these platforms can do to really understand what someone's psyche is, can then very subtly be used to change people's beliefs, to change people's thinkings, and get them to do things that maybe, if they were rational and not being influenced, they wouldn't do.
I mean, up to date, because this is a virtual world, it's largely gone completely unregulated, almost as if it doesn't have to coexist with the same sort of law and order and social standards as the real world. I mean, that's very apparent when you see the behaviour of online trolls. But how imperative do you think it is to actually now try and harness and at least sort of control this cyber metaverse that's being created?
Well, the trouble is technology is moving so fast and legislation never keeps up with it. The current piece of legislation that covers all activity online is the 1990 Computer Misuse Act. Well, in 1990, Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and most of the things that we hear about today didn't exist. So this online harms bill is essential at trying to do that. But I think there's a wider piece here for society to try and understand. People will do things online that they wouldn't think twice about doing or even considering in the real world. And they don't realize that everything that's done online, anyone can access it. It doesn't matter how closed down you've got your profiles. There are people around the world who know how to access it and to get at it. And it's immutable. It never goes away. You can always find it. And therefore, I suggest to people that they apply the rule that if you're not going to do it in the front entrance to the local supermarket, if you're not going to say it to people that are coming through, if you're not going to behave in that way, if you're not going to have yourself dressed in the way that you're going to do it online, why do it online?
And when we think about things like Facebook, about Twitter, until it comes to election time, and then we seem to get extremely polarised, well, we're polarised all the time, not much thought is really given to what's going on. But how easily could social media platforms be harnessed or exploited as weapons of war?
Well, they are already, because we keep hearing Chief of the Defence Staff and the Secretary for Defence talking about the grey zone. And this is nothing new. This goes back to the 6th century Chinese philosopher and general Sun Tzu, who said, all warfare is deception, all deception is warfare. And if you can win a battle without having to fight, then that's the way that you should be prosecuting warfare. And that's what's happening in the modern information age, because things can be fed at you. And people are very quick at developing what I call self-misinforming groupthink. So you don't like the argument that's coming through on your Twitter feed or your other feed. So what you do is you mute or you block those that are against the messaging, the ideas that you've got, because you think, I disagree with them. They're just being trolls. They're being angry. But then all of a sudden your timeline's filled with people that are reinforcing your beliefs the whole way through. And you think, oh, well, then I have to be right. Everyone on my timeline is believing the same thing that I do. But they're only doing that because you're only keeping people in your timeline who think the same way as you. And that's easy to manipulate. Governments are manipulating it, large corporations are manipulating it, and they're getting it to try and get you to do something, whether it be vote in a certain way, whether it be buy a certain product, or invest in another way. You are being manipulated.
Thank you so much, Philip, for coming on. Sinister stuff and fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much. Philip Ingram, MBE there. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Daria Kuss, Associate Professor in Psychology at Nottingham Trent University and a cyber psychology expert. Thank you so much for coming on. I mean, we've just heard Philip Ingram there talking about how social media could indeed be harnessed to manipulate populations, or at least portions of demographics, to behave in certain ways. But how powerful is the influence of our virtual world on our real world when it comes to our psychology?
Thanks a lot, Alex, for having me today. I think you're posing a really important question, thinking about the virtual world and its impact on our reality. Now, the virtual reality is present in our everyday lives. I think there is very little differentiation anymore between what happens online and what happens offline. We are on social media on a regular basis. We're using technology in order to communicate, in order to engage with others, in order to do our shopping, to be entertained. We're using social media for any kinds of purposes. Technology use really has become the status quo. And I think we really need to understand that it has become so deeply intertwined with our lives that we cannot imagine our lives without technology. And as a consequence, what we will see and what we are already seeing are a number of psychological impacts of technology use on our mental health and well-being. Some of them are very positive, but others, as the recent Facebook papers have shown, can be very, very negative in very many ways, detrimental to our psychological well-being, can have an impact on our levels of potential depression, anxiety, stress, addiction, which we've studied quite a lot here at Nottingham Trent University. And when we're thinking about young users, especially who are still in the process of developing their brains, where they're developing their control mechanisms in their brains, they may be particularly vulnerable to the possible negative impact of excessive technology use. That's social media use, that's gaming, and a variety of other uses. And we really need to bear in mind that for some users, excessive use may indeed have very negative impacts on their lives.
Would it be fair to say that sort of substantive use of social media can indeed sort of start to essentially rewire you neurologically?
Yes, absolutely. So what we know from the research that has been done is that there are a number of associations between the kinds of relationships you see in terms of behavior and brain mechanisms that are involved in engaging with, on the one hand, particular addictive substances, but on the other hand, also with potentially addictive behaviors, such as the engagement in social media, the engagement in online gaming. So we know that on a neuroimaging level, so on a neurochemical level, there are a number of similarities where the limbic brain areas are being activated during continued use of technology, during continued use of social media, as well as gaming, where there are reward systems integrated within those technological platforms, reward mechanisms that trigger the reward centers in the brain, similar to those reward centers that are being triggered through the ingestion of a psychoactive substance. So we know that research is supportive of this. At the same time, we know that the brain is an organ that learns really quickly. We can condition it to learn to associate rewards experienced through the engagement with social media with actual happy feelings. So over time, the brain learns to associate, your social media use with some sort of a reward, and therefore it will be requesting the reward on a regular basis. This is how potentially problematic behaviors may be maintained over time. And for some individuals, this may mean that they may actually require professional help in order to be able to get out of potential addictive cycles as well. And that's one of the reasons for why I think it's really important for the social media industry as well as the gaming industry to make sure that the corporate social responsibility measures are indeed increased. We have written recommendations to the UK Government Select Committee, Digital Sport and Media to really make suggestions in terms of what can be done to improve the situation. And we need additional regulatory mechanisms. And we also need the industry to work together with independent research organizations to ensure that we have the objective data stemming from within their services to give us a very clear indication about what is it about those platforms that may be problematic and how can we potentially change them in order to benefit the users in a positive way.
Dr. Kuss, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you for coming and giving a scientific perspective on this topic. We can speak now to Ian Corby, Executive Director at the Age Verification Providers Association, who joins me in the studio. Delighted to have you here, because something that has possessed me for a while now when it comes to social media and the World Wide Web in general is how vulnerable and exposed children are without proper protections. I mean, how much of a concern is this as we start looking at the online safety bill to make sure, not just in terms of the most hardcore content, such as adult material on porn sites, but even social media content? How do we protect youngsters?
Thanks very much for having me. I mean, there's a really famous cartoon showing two dogs playing on a laptop computer, and one looks to the other and says, "It's great. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." And the problem we have on the internet is nobody knows if you're a child. The internet was never designed for children. So in order to preserve the freedoms of adults, but be able to protect children, the first thing we've got to do is figure out which users are adults and which are children. And so what age verification has grown up to do, originally focused mostly on the adult content industry, as you mentioned, but now increasingly, because of new laws that are coming through on GDPR, the data protection laws, and obviously the online safety bill, which we were just giving evidence this morning in Parliament about, there's a growing need generally to know the age or broad age range of users online.
I mean, why on earth has this not happened already? Because certainly when I was growing up, pornography was on a magazine behind an opaque cover at the top shelf of a newsagent. You had to be an adult to buy it. You even had to be an adult to reach it down from the top shelf, frankly. And yet today, material like that is available ubiquitously. And the age verifications they have in place, well, they're just rudimentary. Put in your birthday, anyone who can do a basic sum could invent something. Why on earth have we basically allowed this to run rampant and are now trying to claw it back in today?
I think it's properly a question for government, but I do believe in 5 years' time, say, we'll look back on the days when we had no general age checks online, in the same way as we'd be completely incredulous if now kids could walk into a casino or a strip joint without being challenged on their age. Because you mentioned the meta universe in your introduction. More and more of our life is going virtual and going online. And so all we are trying to do is make a very easy mechanism, a privacy-preserving mechanism, to allow us to apply those same norms that we've had for years in real society to our online lives.
And do we need to basically put these just on the most harmful content, or is this also about looking at social media? Because at one point Facebook were talking about bringing children's Instagram out. I mean, thankfully they seem to have ditched that prospect. Now they've been rather exposed as to realising their content can be extremely harmful to children. But I mean, would we need to put age verification on things such as Facebook and Instagram, which is supposed to remove harmful content anyway? Or is this just for those sites which are, you know, very obviously adult by nature?
Well, the new bill before Parliament looks at proportionate implementation, where you take a look at the risk and then you decide what level of age assurance you get. You can have very hard age assurance, check a passport, or softer age estimation, where we use sort of facial analysis to guess your age within perhaps 1 or 2 years of accuracy. So I think it's a matter of getting it proportionate, because, of course, the more rigorous it is, the more disruptive it is to your online behaviour. And of course, we want kids to use the internet because there's a world of opportunity out there. One thing the social media firms could do today is to start checking when you say you turn 18 because you opened your account 5 years ago when you were 13, they could check that you are actually 18 today by doing a proper adult age verification check. Unfortunately, that would probably demonstrate quite how many 10-year-olds are signing up to those social media platforms today.
When I've brought up conversations like this in the real world with other people and say, you know, I personally think that it's crazy that the World Wide Web is the wild, wild west, that anything can go on there and, you know, there's no checks, no regulation, and it might be a parallel world, but my word, it can be a dangerous one. People say, oh, well, you know, if you put things behind age verification, if you try and regulate porn, then people are just going to make it. It's going to go on the dark web. Children will get it anyway. How watertight is the sort of technology that you will be able to offer and hopefully that people will be able to implement to protect children? Is it sort of porous, or does it have a complete...
Well, as I say, it's proportionate. So it might be that to buy a knife online, you want to have an extremely strict measure where even if you've proven your age last week, we'd still want to check your photo is the same photo as the ID we saw a week ago. But perhaps for accessing pornography, as long as you're roughly 18 or so, an estimation technique might be sufficient. So I think it's important to maintain that sense of proportionality when you apply this. And on that basis, it can be as strict as you want it to be. I would just think, for example, of my friend's daughter. My friend was telling me literally yesterday that she's got Net Nanny, she's got the stuff switched on for the ISP, she's tried everything possible, but her daughter has discovered search. And she searches for stuff and finds cartoons of stuff or things where bad words have been removed, so the search engine doesn't block those. And she's literally, the mum has had to go through and create a whole list of websites that she's blocking her 11-year-old daughter from accessing, but after the fact. So we need those platforms to be the ones taking responsibility to help mums and dads up and down the country by just checking that the children are old enough for the content that they're being shown.
And in creating this technology, have you found it really rather distressing or depressing to see the situation that we're in at the moment with the internet without any regulation?
Well, certainly I deal with the children's charities, and they're extremely concerned about this. I think nobody's trying to take away the rights and freedoms of adults here. But if you take, for example, the advertising for high-fat, sugar and salt foods, the government said there can be no digital advertising because they don't trust the platforms to keep that advertising away from children. Now, if we had a more robust system where we could guarantee that audiences were adults and can make their own decisions about chocolate, then we wouldn't need these rather broad brush and draconian outright bans.
Ian, thank you so much for coming and talking about this today. It's fascinating stuff, a bit of a pet topic of mine, so I'm sure we'll be speaking.
Thank you for having me.
Now, moving on, MPs who have second jobs are under the spotlight as the Owen Paterson lobbying row continues. Members of Parliament currently earn £81,932 a year, almost 3 times the average salary, and they get second homes and travel allowances. Yet, more than 200 of them have additional jobs. They are forbidden from getting paid in return for advocating for a certain issue. The MP Owen Paterson resigned after he was found to have broken lobbying guidelines. But what sort of moonlighting is right? Or will it just be easier to forbid all side hustles? It's prompted calls for a review of the rules around double jobbing, including from the International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Well, let's get the view of the Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine. Christine, I mean, it was the Lib Dems who brought forward the debate yesterday about, the Tory sleaze, let's say, about parliamentary standards. Where do you stand when it comes to MPs having second jobs? Would it not be easier just to say you're an MP, focus on that alone?
Well, that is actually what I do. And I do think there is an argument for we are public servants. That's our jobs. But I think we also have to allow for the circumstances where there are people who may want to be an MP for 10 years and then go back to being a GP, or they continue as a role as perhaps a fire officer while they're an MP, and they want to be able to do that. And there are other situations where people have professional qualifications they have to keep up, and that sort of thing. So I don't think you can just make a simple rule. I think we do need to examine the situation, and we cannot have the situation where there is any conflict of interest between the interests of a constituency and the constituents that you represent and somebody you're taking money from for lobbying on their behalf. That can't happen. But I think we have to examine it carefully and come up with a solution that works and that ensures that we don't get into another situation like this one, where someone has been lobbying on behalf of a private company and private interests while they are an MP. That is already out with the rules.
I mean, there'll be people I've spoken to on this topic who say, well, if you suddenly start to forbid MPs from having second jobs, for holding positions on boards or directorships or whatever it may be, then you're going to essentially put off a lot of talented people who have had jobs in the real world from becoming politicians. Is that something that you agree with, or do you think that's frankly just an excuse to use what's a very privileged position to earn an extra buck or two?
I think, being someone who had a real job in the real world for 30 years, I think that it is important that we have that experience. But I think what we have to do is look very carefully at the rules and ensure that we don't have people taking lots of money simply for being, a company being able to say that they have a former cabinet minister and then, they lobby on their behalf. We've heard so much of that recently, so much sort of sleaze and, possibilities of cronyism and, cabinet ministers using their position to lobby ministers directly. We had the whole Greensill controversy about what exactly went on there. And these questions are the questions that need to be answered. If, on the other hand, you are a qualified social worker or a GP or a fire officer, someone who is performing a public service and who needs to keep up that qualification, or if you're a farmer who has a family farm and you're also an MP. I mean, these are different situations. So what we have to do is look at the situation carefully and protect the public's interest, protect them from people misusing the position as MP for their own benefits or having any conflict of interest. We must be transparent. The public have a right to know what we do, and they have a right to know that our first and only priority is our constituents.
Christine, I think a lot of people watching this will probably agree with you today. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
You're welcome.
That's Christine Jardine. After the break, would you go wool-free this winter? That's right. That's what one animal rights campaign is calling for. We'll be asking why. But first, let's get a roundup of the news headlines with Polly.
You're watching GB News. These are the latest news headlines. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has announced COVID jabs for frontline NHS England staff will be mandatory. Employees will have to be fully vaccinated by April 2022 unless they can prove they're exempt. Around 100,000 NHS workers haven't had their first dose yet. Care home workers in England have already been told they must have both jabs by this Thursday. Sajid Javid says it's necessary to protect patients. The UK government's pledged £165 million of funding for communities and women's groups impacted by climate change. The funding was announced as part of COP26 Summit's Gender Day. A 3.5-metre tall Syrian refugee puppet called Little Amal opened the session on advancing gender equality and climate action. The puppets travelled 5,000 miles through Europe and the UK to highlight the plight of refugees. Tensions are still rising on the Poland-Belarus border, where thousands of migrants are gathering. Polish security forces have accused the Belarusian government of using the migrants as weapons, launching some hybrid attacks against their country. And Sir Keir Starmer visited the husband of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, who's on the 17th day of his hunger strike, and said there must be a resolution to the case. Richard Ratcliffe wants the government to do more to secure the release of his wife, who's been detained in Iran for 5 years now. The Foreign Office says it is doing all it can to get her home. And England and Manchester United striker Marcus Rashford has been awarded an MBE, and he's dedicated the award to his mum. The 24-year-old was commended for his campaign last summer, working to ensure no vulnerable children went hungry. That resulted in the government changing its policy on free school meal vouchers during lockdown. The football star says he still has dreams he wants to accomplish. And the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule has splashed down safely in the Gulf of Mexico, ending a 6-month NASA mission aboard the International Space Station. It was the third crew launched into orbit under NASA's partnership with SpaceX, the rocket company formed in 2002 by the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk. The crew spent 199 days in space during their mission. That's it from me. I'm back in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Well, a comment piece in the Telegraph newspaper today by Sherelle Jacobs got us talking here at the afternoon agenda. The columnist Sherelle says that numerous quangos and the BBC continue to be dominated by a soft left worldview. She says we're lacking a conservative worldview at senior levels in our institutions. How right is she? Let's get the view of Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers, who joins me now. Fraser, lovely to have you on board. And there's, he's not on board, is he? Look at that. That's not Fraser. We're going to, bear with me, we're going to get him up any moment now. There he is. Hi,
Hello.
Fraser. Hi. No, that was a bit of a, bit of suspenseful introduction there. Only what you deserve, the drum roll. Fraser, so yeah, Sherelle Jacobs in the Telegraph today is talking about where she thinks there's a sort of groupthink that still exists within institutions, within big organisations such as the BBC, which might be having a sort of distorting influence on the way these organisations and institutions operate. Do you think that's still the case?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that, the Conservatives are in office, but they're not in power. There are so many institutions, particularly public bodies, that are running almost on a completely parallel agenda to what the government is trying to set out to do. I mean, I almost have to laugh every time, a government minister pops up and saying that they're launching a so-called war on woke or something like that. And you think, nothing is happening. We have to remember that it's under the Conservative government that, for instance, the NHS has gone down a kind of gender identity rabbit hole, talking about birthing parents and people with prostates and things like that instead of, using normal language. It's under the Conservative government that education has gone down a similar rabbit hole too. So I think you can see there is a clear split between the elected government and our various public institutions. And the most important thing is not necessarily, that split, but it's the split between public bodies and the actual public that they're supposed to serve. They have this kind of elite liberal worldview that actually makes them think that they don't really serve the public, but they see the public as a problem. The public have to be moulded into their image, essentially.
I mean, what can be done to tackle this, though? Because if the government started trying to intervene or interfere too much with these public bodies, it could be considered by some as pretty censorial and unwelcome.
Yeah, I think that's right. In many ways, this actually goes back to the pre-Blair Tory administrations. Actually, this is where I differ from this sort of Telegraph piece, blaming this on the sort of Blairification of public life. A lot of these bodies were set up by the Thatcher government and various major governments to essentially subvert democracy, to do politics away from local democracy, from institutions that would be accountable to Parliament or to local democratic means. And instead we have these kind of quangos, as they call them, the quasi-government bodies that have sort of at arm's length from the government, that have no accountability. Really, they're not, put under pressure by public opinion in the way that they should be for institutions that serve the public. So the answer is to sort of re-democratize these institutions, to bring them back into proper government control. Let's not pretend that state institutions can be independent of politics. We don't want them to be. We want them to be accountable to us and accountable to public opinion.
And briefly, what do you think has created this sort of groupthink blob? Is it a case that everyone comes from a similar type of background to get to these positions, or is there something actually, being driven by will and deliberate manipulation to create that?
No, I don't think anything deliberate is going on. I think it is, as you suggest, it is remarkably, uniform. The background these people come from, the kind of class basis, they went to the same universities. I mean, I imagine many of them go to similar private schools, or at least think similar things coming from those schools. And, what we really need is a bit of a shake-up. Perhaps we need, they don't really represent anyone is the other factor. This liberal elite floats above society and is not really dragged down by having to represent anyone in the public. We need these people they sort of float free from their institution's own goals, in fact, a lot of the time. They seem to be pursuing a kind of woke agenda, which is often at odds with their actual jobs, which is very strange. You can kind of notice this in the way that our museums suddenly want to decolonize themselves and deconstruct themselves. The BBC seems far more interested in pursuing diversity initiatives than in actually, it's put £100 million, I think, recently into diversity initiatives, which should be spent on making decent, good quality, rigorous programming. And it's even true in the private sector as well. This kind of groupthink is not limited to the public sector. If you think about, Sky News, the way it's jumped in on all of the climate change stuff recently this week, perhaps more so than even the BBC. So yeah, it is a kind of groupthink from people coming from the same background and essentially not being challenged on their views, not having to be accountable to the public. And in many ways, they're able to pass off their own opinions as independent expert advice, as almost a kind of scientific truth. And I think that's something that really needs to be taken on.
It does indeed. Perilous world we live in, Fraser. You look like you're in the Crystal Maze industrial zone there, so good luck on your next challenge. Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked. Now, when it comes to saving energy, I bet you thought you were on pretty safe ground by slinging on a woolly jumper and waiting that bit longer to switch the heating on. Oh, apparently not. PETA, which stands for People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is encouraging us to have a wool-free winter. What next? It's because the organisation has found violence and abuse in the industry, with sheep suffering injuries after workers kicked, punched and stamped on their heads, jabbed them in the face with sharp metal clippers and left huge gashes on their bodies. Some of the images you may see are disturbing, so do watch out for that. We're joined by Peter White from PETA to shed light on their ongoing campaign for a wool-free winter. Jennifer, fantastic to have you on. Now, I would be an advocate for don't put the heating on, put on a cosy jumper. But how much should we be concerned if we're going out to get our new fashionable knit this Christmas that an animal hasn't been tortured in the process of getting that wool?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. So yeah, we do get this as quite a new concept for people. But over the past few years, PETA has released dozens of exposés over 4 continents at over 100 shearing facilities, which documents the abuse and cruelty of sheep. As you said, there's sheep who've been punched in the face, they've been beaten with clippers, they have their heads repeatedly slammed into the ground, and most people can only actually watch a couple of seconds of it. So that's why we are encouraging people to see the footage for themselves and then shop one of the many vegan-friendly, eco-friendly and animal-friendly options that are available all over the British high street. And of course, the point you mentioned about the environment, it's a huge misconception that wool is eco-friendly. It's absolutely not. And the Pulse of Fashion report actually listed it as one of the 4th most damaging materials for the environment, and cow's leather was number 1.
Let's have a little look at what you're talking about, actually. I'm going to give another warning to viewers here that some of these images might be quite disturbing and shocking. If you've got little kids, maybe tell them not to watch. So look, what can we see going on here? We have sheep essentially being pulled in to have their fleeces removed.
Yeah, so with the wool industry, something people often aren't aware of is that shearers are paid by the volume, not by the hour, which means they're having to work incredibly quickly, which is why the sheep are often manhandled in such an incredibly violent way, to the point that they often have gaping wounds, which are often sewn up without even so much as an anaesthetic. Sheep also have been known to die on the shearing room floor. And of course, as well, at the end of their lives, sheep don't get a happy retirement. And once they're not viable for any more wool production, they're sent to the slaughterhouse where their throats are slit, often whilst they're still conscious.
Well, thank you for coming on and raising this. I mean, it's sickening, really, that people can be cruel to animals in this manner, and there seems to be declining standards when it comes to animal husbandry. So I do thank you for bringing that to light. Now, after the break, did Sweden get it right on COVID? With a lower death rate than neighbouring countries, we're going to be asking if their limited lockdown approach was actually a more effective method than our own. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Sweden's approach to COVID caused a lot of controversy since the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak. It bucked the international trend and refused to impose a lockdown, unlike many of its European neighbours, attracting opprobrium in the process. However, latest statistics suggest the Swedish approach may actually have paid off, with the country recording fewer deaths and lower infection rates. Sweden has suffered nearly 1,500 confirmed deaths per million of the population, compared with the European average of 1,800, according to Oxford University research. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Roland Salmon, epidemiologist and former director of the Communicable Disease Surveillance in Wales. What do you make of the Swedish situation? They did create a lot of controversy by saying we're not going to lock down, and people pointed to them and said, well, this is really dangerous, this is reckless. But that is a subtle difference. But 1,500 deaths per million rather than the average 1,800 deaths per million, does that endorse their approach?
I certainly think that their approach hasn't produced anything worse than the approach of other countries who took much less flexible approaches. They also managed to keep their education going, their employment going, and kept other health problems at bay because much of their health service carried on. And they've done comparably, if not better, than most other European countries. Of course, the difficulty is they compare themselves with other Nordic countries. That's what Scandinavians do. And they possibly didn't do quite so well as Norway and Finland. Though that said, whereas Sweden had quite largish peaks in excess deaths in both of the winter waves of the pandemic, they didn't have anything much in between, while those other countries did show excess deaths in between. I think what you carry away from this is the lesson that with lockdowns, at best, you kick the can a bit down the road, and some elderly, frail people die a little bit sooner than they would otherwise have done. That doesn't make it all right. I mean, I'm getting close to being elderly and frail myself, so I don't think of it like that. But what it does mean is that whereas I think most people had the idea that if you did this stuff, you'd beat the virus and we all be super healthy. In fact, the gains from lockdown policies are quite marginal. And the downsides, I would argue, have never really properly been looked at. And I don't just mean the economic downsides, so they're important, but I mean the educational and health downsides.
Yeah, so do you think if we were to do a sort of comparative audit, when we look back at lockdowns, and the effects of lockdowns no doubt are going to continue for years to come with people who haven't been diagnosed in a timely fashion and will end up succumbing to a disease that may have been preventable, etc., etc. Do you think that there is a risk that history will judge us to have taken completely the wrong approach?
I think probably history ought to judge us for having taken the wrong approach, but as someone once said to me, I suspect the lie is too great. Too many people have done this in too many parts of the world that there will always be an after-the-fact justification. But I think the experience of Sweden shows us that more flexible approaches can be taken. We do need to understand one or two other things about Sweden, it has to be said. One is that it's not so much that they made a national decision not to lock down, but they left it all to the different counties. So there was a range of responses, generally more flexible. And that is, I think, perhaps a feature that's somewhat lost sight of. But by and large, their response has delivered quite as much for considerably less social disruption.
I mean, one thing one could say is, you know, it's certainly when you look at a country like Belgium, which had the highest percentage, I think, of deaths per million. That's a country that I know. I've lived there. It's got a huge amount of population density and is also very much a hub of travel from around Europe, with people coming in and out. You've got the headquarters of NATO, the European Commission, the European Parliament, etc., etc. Is it largely more down to, rather than a particular approach, how a country is in terms of their physical health, the capacity of their health service, and again, things such as population density that are the biggest determinants as opposed to a governmental approach? Or could there be something lying in the Swedish approach that shows us that allowing a virus such as COVID-19, which isn't necessarily harmful to the main percentage of the population, to actually be transmitted and to potentially reach herd immunity, to bring up a much attacked phrase, which do you think is it? Or is it a combination of both?
I think it's certainly what you call the initial conditions of a country make a huge difference. I mean, I'm frequently asked why we can't be like New Zealand, and the answer is geographically, New Zealand is quite remote, it's quite sparsely populated, and has only 1 or 2 points of entry. The United Kingdom, like, say, Belgium, has an awful lot of people coming and going. So, yes, I think you're right to see the other conditions in the country, in many respects, having a much greater effect than many of these global measures that are taken. My other objection to the global measures is that I think they've made us take the eye off the ball of some of the more specific things that we might have done in terms of preventing infection in hospitals, preventing infection in care homes, and generally better protecting our more vulnerable population, because as you rightly point out, risk is hugely age related. Under, let's say, under 20, you're at very little risk at all. Under 30, you're at very little risk at all. Above 60, and particularly if you've got other things wrong with you, then your risk starts to become much higher. And I don't think as a country we've ever properly tailored the policy to the different risks in the different sections of the population.
A blunt tool for a very complex problem. Dr. Roland Salmon, fantastic to have you on and hearing your very intelligent insight and a point of view that often doesn't get platformed as much as it should. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda, and there is lots more still to come, so please don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. There is a lot to come. It's just about to hit the 5 o'clock hour. Now, this show is all about what I think, what you think, and what my guests think. So it's not news as you know it, but more discussion and debate on things that are, or really should be, on your agenda. Still to come. As the crisis on the Polish border escalates, Belarus is being accused of inhuman behaviour towards migrants by the European Commission. Our security editor will have the latest on that. And after a man is rescued from a Welsh cave, apparently in good spirits, what possesses people to take part in such dangerous hobbies in the first place, and how easy is it to get them out of a mess? And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets today, but we need to talk about your online safety. Do you think social media harms you? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with the glorious Polly.
Good evening, it's 5 o'clock. These are your GB News headlines. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid has announced COVID jabs for frontline NHS England staff will be mandatory. Employees will have to be fully vaccinated by April unless they can prove they're exempt. Around 100,000 NHS workers haven't even had their first dose yet. Sajid Javid says it's necessary to protect patients.
I'm mindful not only of our need to protect human life, but our imperative to protect the NHS and those services upon which we all rely. We must avoid preventable harm and protect patients in the NHS, protect colleagues in the NHS, and, of course, protect the NHS itself.
Care home workers in England have already been told they must have both jabs by this Thursday. Simon Wallace is clinical lead at St Cecilia's care home, and he told GB News today that staff have a duty of care to protect their patients, and the best way to do that is through vaccination. But he also said the care homes industry can't afford to lose any more staff.
People have seen that the complete unawareness of the government to recognise social care and the things that it does do. And it's just causing absolute problems with recruitment and retention. There's a massive void of people already for working within the care sector, and this is only going to make it worse. But then I also feel that the people that we look after need to be.
The government has vowed to step in if cricket leaders fail to take real action to resolve the racism crisis. Yorkshire County Cricket Club and the England and Wales Board have come under scrutiny for their handling of Azim Rafiq's allegations of institutional racism. The cricketer has now reached a financial settlement with the club after an employment tribunal. But the Culture Minister, Chris Philip, told MPs a full and transparent investigation must take place.
There is no place for racism in sport. Indeed, there is no place for racism anywhere in society. It must be confronted, it must be eradicated, and it should never be written off as just banter.
The UK government has pledged £165 million of funding for communities and women's groups impacted by climate change. The funding was announced as part of COP26 Summit's Gender Day. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, told delegates in Glasgow 80% of people displaced in climate change are women.
Addressing the rapidly changing climate is a matter of justice and equality with the most vulnerable, most affected, including Indigenous communities, less developed countries, and our focus today and every day on women.
Sir Keir Starmer has visited the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's on the 17th day of his hunger strike in London, and said there must be a resolution to the case. Richard Ratcliffe wants the government to do more to secure the release of his wife, who's been detained in Iran for the last 5 years. Mr Ratcliffe told GBNews the Prime Minister has to make good on his promise to bring her back.
Nazanin and others are being held over the UK government's debt. They need to resolve that debt dispute so that people can come home, and they really do need to challenge Iran on its hostage taking. It doesn't make it safe to British citizens to do neither on both things. Exactly, he's the Prime Minister, he's responsible for all of our safety, he's responsible for protecting all British citizens. I think my point to him is, he needs to take that responsibility seriously.
Tensions are rising on the Poland-Belarus border, where thousands of migrants are gathering. It comes a day after hundreds of people tried to break through barriers, cutting barbed wire and fences. Polish security forces described the influx of migrants as a coordinated attempt to massively enter their territory, accusing the Belarusian government of launching hybrid attacks against them. SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule has splashed down safely in the Gulf of Mexico, capping a 6-month NASA mission aboard the International Space Station. It was the third crew launched into orbit under NASA's partnership with SpaceX, the rocket company formed in 2002 by the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk. The crew spent 199 days in space during their mission. That's it from me. I'm back in half an hour.
Thank you, Polly. Welcome back. How long before we start getting adverts for bespoke social media therapy, counselling for our online addictions and habits, therapy for digital disorders? We all know someone who has taken a break from Twitter, closed down their Facebook, or desperately attempted to cache the contents of a decade-old timeline waiting to be scraped by a defence architect to unearth a career-destroying post. We know people receive death threats and a relentless barrage of abuse from online trolls. We know influencers marketing themselves as plastic commodities for clicks devoid of the complexities of human nuance. We know of conspiracy theories, deep fakes, paedophile rings, financial frauds, cyber espionage, terrorist networks, uprising from the Arab Spring to the End SARS campaigns, violent pornography, child grooming, the dark web, data theft, and an industrial scale of intelligence gathering and mental manipulation way beyond the wildest dreams and material bounds of the non-virtual world. And yet, we have allowed a technology barely 15 years old, to not only grow at a rapid rate, but to entirely self-regulate, to the point that dot-com deities may deign to strip an elected president of a platform while covering up their own seedy internal reports of the horrific and insidious lifelong harms they elicit, particularly towards children. Were we crazy to allow Silicon Valley to take over the world, albeit a virtual one? Is it time to delete the myriad apps that cajole and control you through your laptop, tablet and phone? Or are you grounded and robust enough to weather the social media storm, whatever it may have in store? Is our boundless online metaverse an exciting and truly liberating testament to human progress? Or is it the sinister beginning of an unprecedented dystopian decline? Well, my first guest this hour is Head of Child Safety Online Policy for the NSPCC, Andy Burrows. Andy, always great to have you on. I mean, the online safety bill, the Parliament's taking evidence right now for that. Do you think that we stand some chance of protecting the innocence of children against the altar of adult rights and freedoms?
We absolutely can, and for a long time, Alex, we've heard the tech companies say that these issues are too big, they're too complex, they aren't issues that nation states can legislate on, and those arguments are just palpably nonsense because the UK is one of the biggest markets in the world for all of these companies. So if we have the political will to say enough is enough in every other aspect of children's lives, governments set the rules about how children should be protected, and if we want to do the same online, then we can. So we've got this bill that's currently going through the early foothills of parliamentary scrutiny, and if there's the political will to really bolster that, to really make sure that child safety is front of mind for tech firms, not just an afterthought, then absolutely we can see the UK really lead the world, really demonstrate global leadership when it comes to protecting our kids from the range of really disturbing harms that we see at NSPCC every single day.
Well, let's talk about some of those disturbing harms. It may only be 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so we'll have to pick how we talk about them quite gently. But do you think that a lot of adults don't really realise the extent of risk and quite how revolting and nefarious some of these activities are?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what we've seen is child sexual abuse in particular soar in the last few years. We've seen it increase in scale and complexity. And let's not be fatalistic about this. This isn't abuse happening to children that, if the internet wasn't happening, might be happening in other ways. What we're seeing is that sites like Facebook, like Instagram, like Snapchat have been designed in a way where child safety has not been considered. So these platforms give abusers new opportunities to contact large numbers of children, to groom large numbers of children in ways that simply weren't possible. They're actively exploiting the very poor, the very high-risk design features of sites to be able to commit, very, very horrific abuse. And very often what we're talking about here is not contacting children with a view of then going on to necessarily meet them in person, but it's using social networks to contact children with a view of then getting children to produce images and videos of themselves. And in a sense, social networks are being used as a conveyor belt for a constant supply of new child abuse images that start on Facebook, that start on Instagram, but then will eventually find their way onto the dark web. This is exactly the type of thing that we can and should prevent. It's really disappointing that it's taken as long as it has to get to the point where we recognise that self-regulation just doesn't work, but now we really can fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to Ian Corby, who's been giving evidence to the Parliamentary Select Committee today, saying that, he hopes that with age verification, we're going to live in an era soon enough where we'll look back on the way things are today with disgust. But we've spoken there about adults exploiting children online, abusing children online. But is there not a risk as well that the way that we're allowing children to operate in what is actually a sort of very unbounded, unregulated adult world risks turning children themselves into abusers largely of other children?
Yeah, and there are, kind of real problems with peer-on-peer abuse, and we've seen with Everyone's Invited over recent months the way in which, harm can be committed by teenagers as well as to teenagers. But I think there's a really important point here, and this comes back to the principle of: are we making sure that sites are safe for all users who are using them, and that includes children? And one of the things that really frustrates me very often, particularly on conversations about how do we balance privacy for adults and freedom of expression for adults with those of children, is that we shouldn't forget that here in the UK, 1 in 5 internet users here in the UK, 1 in 3 globally, are children. So in simple democratic terms, when tech companies are making products, when we're designing laws about online safety, we should be starting from the point that we're talking about a really significant group of users. And not only are we talking about a significant group of users, 1 in 5 here in the UK, but also users that are inherently vulnerable because they are children and they face additional risks and vulnerabilities as a result of that. And very often that gets lost in the debate. So, when we're talking about, for example, suicide and self-harm content, sometimes this becomes quite a philosophical debate about freedom of expression and privacy versus safety. Let's be really clear about some of the types of content that in my job I see every day. That is, kind of twisted influencer style accounts on Instagram that are then, teaching young people, in a kind of twisted influencer guise, how to go on and commit, really dangerous acts of suicide and self-harm. The algorithms kick in, and then that means that a vulnerable teenager who perhaps sees that content once or twice when they're feeling low, then get bombarded with that on the algorithms. And if anyone wants to say to me that is someone's freedom of expression to post that content, it's nonsense. We're talking about harmful content to teenagers that shouldn't be there. And then not only do the platforms fail to enforce their own terms and conditions, their own community standards, it's then their processes, their algorithms that are kicking in and causing further harm. And, it's really vital that we see this debate, in the terms really of what it is.
Yeah, Andy Burrows, and it's really vital that you keep on doing what you're doing. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and raising this deeply complex subject. Delight to have you on the programme again. Well, joining me in the studio now is Managing Director of UK's News Guard, Alex Caddier. Great to have you here. Now, you look more at things such as fake news and deep fakes and the creation of posts and content that really don't necessarily tether to reality and may actually indeed be designed to manipulate us into certain courses of action that, well, frankly, they're not necessarily societally beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, NewsGuard fights misinformation at a source level. So we create ratings based on 9 transparent journalistic criteria, which are on our website, and we give a rating out of 100 of news and information websites. Certainly websites who claim to be news and information websites. That's a big part of the problem when it comes to misinformation, is that you have known outlets. But then, for example, we're in Paddington in central London. I go online and I see Paddington News and I go, great, I'm going to have information about Paddington. No, it turns out it's run by a local shop who's trying to do down the next shop. And there's no way at the moment on social media to distinguish from that. Solutions like NewsGuard, for example, could give users information on ownership and financing, who runs the outlet, things that are transparent in most major media outlets. But a lot of online, anonymous, smaller blogs, which have huge followings on social media, spread this misinformation with no real resilience, like you were talking in your introduction for users. There's no real way of knowing, right? They look legit, they seem fine, they're publishing what they call news. How are we really to know what's misinformation, what's not, and what we can rely on? And I think the platforms are certainly not particularly engaging with that kind of content.
Yeah, I mean, we at GB News like to think of ourselves as a multi-platform news entity, but we have there our television channel to make sure that we are regulated. We're regulated by Ofcom, which means when it comes to news, we have to operate under strict conditions where we can't give you a deluge of fake content. We have to be very careful with things such as accuracy. Do you think the risk now there's so much more citizen journalism and user-generated content and people wanting to become, let's say, YouTube influencers, that they need to go that extra step further to break through the static and to grab attention, and as a result, actually, the content people imbibe online, the clickbait, is likely to get ever more detached from reality?
Sure, and I think that has a lot to do with how algorithms promote things, and that's one of the big things that the Online Safety Bill is looking at. It's not necessarily the content, right? The government isn't going to come and say, well, you posted this fake thing, you're under arrest, we're going to take you to the shop. No, it's how these things are amplified. How are Facebook and YouTube and other platforms deciding to amplify things? And if they decide to take something down, why? What are the reasons? Why are you taking down one piece of content and not another? Why is it that anti-vaccine content can be allowed on one platform, but a member of parliament making an argument that you can disagree with is removed on another? The Online Safety Bill brings consistency to these things and also brings a right of appeal and transparency. If you take my post down, you have to explain to me at least why you've done it. That's very much the bare minimum, as you would with anything that's regulated by Ofcom, like GBNews, like other outlets. And I think there's a real important distinction there that might actually empower users a lot more rather than quash, or that feeling, that frustration of, a friend of mine had his Instagram account deleted, couldn't, for love nor money, get an explanation as to why, and then it came back one day. No reason why.
It's fair to say, isn't it, we've got elected leaders in the real world, most of them democratically put in position, but our virtual world is governed by a load of sandal-wearing hippies in Silicon Valley that we don't really know much about.
Well, I don't know about their footwear. I couldn't possibly comment on their footwear.
But was that some fake news just
I
there?
wouldn't. Well, I don't know. I'll check on the sandals and get back to you, Alex. No, I think you're right in that there just needs to be structures in place about the systems and the processes and why we are being fed information the way we are. So, for example, you will have a smartphone there, and you'll have a social media app. What you see on your feed is unique. You have it alone. I have my own experience. Your producers in the gallery have their own experience. We have no way of knowing why we get fed what we get fed. There's no transparency about that. Where with everything else, there's some level of regulation. I think the online safety bill will do a lot on forcing platforms to explain themselves and explain why, if you like a certain page on a certain platform, you'll be suggested another page that's exactly the same, to encourage you to stay there and stay there and stay there, with no distinction as to whether or not that's health misinformation or very cute puppies. If it's very cute puppies, great, we're all doing fine. But there is very dangerous health misinformation that thrives on these platforms still, and no transparency as to why it's left on or what the systems in place are there to deal with it.
Alex, thank you so much for coming into the studio to talk to me today. Fascinating stuff. Well, let's head to Washington, D.C. and speak to a friend of the show, the CEO of the Centre of Countering Digital Hate, Imran Ahmed. So I gobbled your name up a bit there, Imran. Lovely to have you back on. It seems to be in the UK, the Parliament is taking evidence right now, looking into all of the risks and the pitfalls of a completely unregulated online world. But when it comes to things such as online hate, how easy is that going to be to regulate? It's one thing to put age verification in place, but it's quite another to try and control people's behaviours, which are often so different from their real life behaviours when they want to behave like online trolls. How on earth do you put that back in the box?
Well, look, norms of behaviour, so what people feel is acceptable, is defined by how a community operates and whether or not there are sanctions, for example, for bad behaviour. Let's take, for example, in the real world, if you were to go up to a footballer and call him the N-word, there'd be repercussions for it. You might lose friends. You might be, if you were in the stadium, you might be banned from the stadium. You might be arrested for it. It might be considered assault. Whereas online, what we find is that the worst kinds of behavior, in fact, are rewarded by the algorithms that underpin these platforms, that decide what content to promote. And we see that they actually reward the worst behavior. So they actually elevate anger, misinformation, which generates controversy over tolerance, good information. And that's one of the things that's been coming out from, viewers may have heard of Frances Haugen, the whistleblower from Facebook, who revealed their internal documents. This is what their own researchers had found. And they realized it was a serious problem. And you know what they did about it? They covered it up. In fact, when organizations like the Centre for Countering Digital Hate did independent research to find these things to be true, they called us liars.
Wow, strident stuff. When we're talking about the manipulation of the algorithms, creating sort of high concentrated extreme content and pushing that stuff over and above what some people might find to be quite benign and benevolent content, how much of that is actually being executed by the creation of bots and therefore sort of being used and manipulated to sow discord and division in society by, potentially hostile foreign actors?
We've certainly found the Russian state, for example, to be highly active in trying to promote divisive content over content that represents, most of us in our normal selves, which is that for the main part, we're a cohesive society, which is based on science, based on facts. We have agreed, we say that things happen. Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. He isn't a space lizard. There are things we can agree on, but of course, what we find is that both the activities of bad actors who seek to elevate contentious information, but also the activities of the platforms themselves who elevate the controversial over the normal, over what we can all accept. Because for them, it's not about trying to make the world a worse place. It's not their aim. I'm not saying Mark Zuckerberg is a Bond villain. But what I am saying is that he's very greedy. And for them, they know that they're in the attention game. Look, 98% of the revenues of Facebook, for example, which also owns Instagram and WhatsApp, that they come from advertising. So this is an attention business. They need to keep us scrolling, engaged, talking to each other, arguing with each other, because arguing is much more sort of addictive than just having a chit chat. And so what they know is that if they elevate the bad information, they elevate controversial information, they can keep us on the platform, they can keep serving us ads, they can keep making money from it. Now, normally when you have a problem like that, an industry that has a lot of good to it, look, social media connects us, that's an amazing thing. but it also has harms, well, then you create costs for those harms to disincentivize their production, to make them do things to clean it up. That's how regulation works. How on earth can it be that the last time that we regulated these companies was decades ago, before social media even was invented? So the online safety bill, I'm very excited about it, but gosh, it's taken a long time to come into fruition, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a big job, isn't it, Imran? And we're definitely going to talk to you for your review when we get more detail on it. Thank you so much for coming on the programme again. We always love to hear from you. Imran Ahmed there from the Centre of Countering Digital Hate, talking about an extremely important topic, which is, of course, online safety. And we're asking you, do you think social media harms you? Well, lots of you have been getting in touch. Ian says it only harms you if you think the world revolves around it. Most of the content will either be a positive view of one's life or vile comments directed at you or others. Treat social media as a bit of fun and nothing else. Otherwise, you'll likely be disappointed with what it gives. Good advice there. Tony says, no, just use that easy tool they give you, the block button. Tommy says there are benefits to social media, but it can also be harmful and detrimental. It depends on how you use it and other factors too. Thomas says too many people think social media represents the real world. It doesn't. It's mostly an echo chamber. Unfortunately, MPs seem to think Twitter represents the Gen Pop as well. Gen Pop, I assume he means general population there, was no doubt being bound by character limitations of that pesky social media we're talking about. Loz says you have to have to stay out from media because it's poison, especially for young kids. Kids should be banned from it. Well, I kind of agree with that, to be honest, but I'm pretty draconian. More of your views at the end of the show. Now, after the break. Inhuman. That's how the European Commission has described the actions of Belarus over the migrants crisis on the Polish border. We're going to be getting the latest from our security editor. First of all, it's the weather forecast.
Hi there. It's rather cloudy out there for much of England and Wales with some light rain and drizzle. Clearer skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland during the rest of the day and overnight, but with some blustery showers. Here's the cold front that brought some rain to the northwest on Monday. It's now sunk south, and so for much of England and Wales it's bringing some cloud and outbreaks of rain whilst showers arrive into Scotland and Northern Ireland, and some fairly heavy downpours into Tuesday evening. A band of more persistent rain sweeping south across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, it stays cloudy and damp for a large part of England and Wales, just the far southeast with some clear spells there, and temperatures dropping away in Kent, for example. Also, a colder night to come for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A touch of frost possible in some sheltered northeastern parts. A bright start here, but a dull and damp start elsewhere. Some persistent rain for parts of northern Devon and Cornwall, Wales, the Midlands, perhaps East Anglia as well. The rain ebbing and flowing, I think, through the morning and into the afternoon. It's just going to stay grey with occasional outbreaks of rain in this area. Sunnier skies for the far southeast and the north. Northern England, North Wales seeing a brighter day, and with further blustery showers for northern and western Scotland, perhaps parts of northern and western Northern Ireland as well. Into Wednesday evening, and we keep those blustery showers, perhaps some longer spells of rain in the far north and northwest. We also keep a lot of low cloud across England and Wales, that cloud covering the hills, leading to a gloomy start to Thursday, but a mild start in the south, temperatures at 9 to 11 Celsius first thing. We're looking at mid-single figures further north, that strong wind in the far north continuing to blow showers through the Northern Isles, the far north of the mainland of Scotland. Otherwise, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, fairly dry with some bright spells on Thursday, a lot of cloud further south for England and Wales. Friday looks unsettled in the north and west, drier at the weekend.
Coming up Tuesday on Dan Wootton Tonight, rapper turned social media sensation and voice of the silent Zuby joins me in Uncancelled, and Nigel Farage is back for more What the Farage. Plus, political commentator Emma Webb is the outsider. Plus, I'll crown a Greatest Britain and Union jackass. You'll get to voice your opinion on one of the day's biggest talking points in the clash. That's Dan Wootton Tonight from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. The migrants crisis in Eastern Europe appears to be escalating. Poland has accused its neighbour Belarus of hostile activity after having hundreds of migrants pushed to its border. The setting for what's being called a manufactured crisis is the shared border between Poland and Belarus. The EU has accused Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko of facilitating an inhuman influx of migrants into Poland, Lithuania and Latvia in retaliation against sanctions. Hundreds have already attempted to cross into Poland, but while the country has closed its borders today, thousands more are expected to arrive in the coming days. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us now. Mark, how on earth did we get to this situation we're in now?
Well, it has been simmering away for a number of months, and Lithuania, Latvia and Poland have all reported significant numbers of migrant incursions into its border from, or their borders from Belarus. However, it now has got to the point where, because of this continued flow, and Poland saying something like 500 incursions a day have been taking place along its border with Belarus, it's decided that it's not going to tolerate that anymore. It's erected and secured the border by putting razor wire up. You can see police officers, there are military there as well, 12,000 Polish troops sent to the border. Now, these images are from yesterday. There was nothing in the way of any significant clashes on the border today. There was some gunfire that was heard this morning. It was very clearly heard, with both the Belarusian side and the Polish side claiming that it was one another that was actually firing. You can listen to it here. So you can quite clearly hear the gunshots there just by the border fence. And all the time more migrants are arriving, because what's been happening and what is apparently continuing to happen is that people in countries in the Middle East, in parts of Africa, in Asia, are being told that they can go to Belarus, to Minsk, and then they will get effectively easy passage into the European Union, that they can go, they'll be bussed down towards the border and then sent over the border, obviously before it's been closed up.
I mean, so when we're talking about a manufactured crisis, it really does seem that way. The president himself is alleged to essentially be forcing this people to partake in this scheme, getting people to get on planes, in their hundreds and be told they're going to have a better life in the EU, this is the way to do it, and then they get abandoned in conditions like that?
Yeah, well, certainly the Belarusian regime has been working with various airlines in third countries to allow people to get passage, to buy visas, 7-day trip, we're told, into Belarus. They're put up for a few days in Minsk before then being transferred, bussed down or taxied down towards the border. And these troops, these airlines are now being contacted by the European Commission and warned that they could well face some kind of sanction, potentially being banned from actually operating in Europe as well if they continue to do this.
Mark, thank you so much. Great to have you in the studio.
Cheers.
Well, still to come on the afternoon agenda, we'll be joined by the daughter of the creators of the children's TV show Thunderbirds, who is threatening legal action against ITV. Why? And we're going to hear what you think about online safety. Do you think social media harms you? First, it's the time for the news headlines.
Hello there, here are your news headlines. I'm Polly Middlehurst. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid has announced COVID jabs for frontline NHS England staff will be mandatory. Employees will have to be fully vaccinated by April 2022 unless they can prove they're exempt. Around 100,000 NHS workers haven't even had their first dose yet. Care home workers in England have already been told they must have both jabs by this Thursday. Sajid Javid says it's necessary to protect patients. Tensions are rising on the Poland-Belarus border, where thousands of migrants are gathering. Polish security forces have accused the Belarusian government of using the migrants as weapons and launching hybrid attacks against the country. And the UK government has pledged £165 million of funding for communities and women's groups impacted by climate change. The funding was announced as part of COP26 Summit's Gender Day. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, told delegates in Glasgow 80% of people displaced in climate change are women. And Sir Keir Starmer, who has visited the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's on the 17th day of his hunger strike, has said there must be a resolution to this case. Richard Radcliffe wants the government to do more to secure the release of his wife, who's been detained in Iran for the last 5 years. The Foreign Office says it's doing all it can to get her home. And SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule, I'm sorry, that's the wrong pictures there. We're showing you the pictures of Marcus Rashford, who's been awarded an MBE and dedicated it to his mum. But let's get back to SpaceX. It has, I can tell you, splashed down safely in the Gulf of Mexico, ending a 6-month NASA mission aboard the International Space Station. It was the third crew launched into orbit under NASA's partnership with SpaceX, the rocket company formed in 2002 by the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk. The crew spent 199 days in space during the mission. That's all from me. I'm back very soon.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Thunderbirds has a special place. Many of us of a certain generation. It's a children's TV show with the famous catchphrase. You know it, Thunderbirds are go! But now, the daughter of the creators of the programme is threatening to take legal action against ITV over lost royalties. Dee Anderson claims when her stepfather, Gerry Anderson, sold the rights to the puppet show in 1962, it was undervalued. She claims the deal made a fortune for ITV, but her mother and the co-creator of the series, Sylvia Anderson, was left out of pocket. Well, Dee Anderson joins me in the studio now. Dee, why was your mother cut out? So she co-created this programme.
Totally.
With your stepfather.
Yeah, absolutely. And she got the original titles, the credits. But over time, she was just airbrushed and cut out. And basically, how it happened that I found out about, you know, when he sold the rights in 75. So, you know, the 62 contract, okay, that was looks a bit dodgy. But the 75 contract actually had her name typed, and a line was actually crossed through her name, crossing her name out. And when I found that, I thought, this is not right. So I immediately took it to a lawyer who said to me, right, I'm going to look into this. And he looked into it, and it was just, well, he uncovered so much other stuff. We've been doing this for about 3.5 years, and we've got a 400-page dossier proving that she was actually bullied, and terrible, terrible bullying. You know, letters saying that she can't use Thunderbirds in the title of her book, being airbrushed out of videos. Even the Royal Mail, you know, said that Gerry was amazing, which of course he was, but she was equally as amazing. And in fact, she was the creative partner, came up with all the ideas, the creations, you know, mainly the storylines were hers as well, because she was really into Hollywood movies, so she based everything around that.
So why was she forced out? Was this just, you know, old-fashioned misogyny at work?
Totally,
basically?
the old boys network. And the more I've looked into it, I started out really just wanting to sort of put the thing right for my mum. But now so many women have come out. It's become like a Me Too movement. So it's, to me, I'm on a mission. I need to sort this out and to stop it now for all women who've been airbrushed, sidelined, and there's many of them are phoning me, contacting me. So, and this is,
so these are other women who have been part of programme making or authors?
Yes.
What sort of...
Writers, somebody who came up with a fantastic idea and had said that she married somebody and her husband stole the idea. I mean, lots of things like that, but it's corporations. I mean, there's many a disgruntled husband or wife, but if that person's backed by a corporation, the other partner doesn't stand a chance. And that's what's happened to my mum.
And you say that initially that you were given, well, your mother, well, your stepfather actually, was given a pretty ropey deal by ITV, where they bought it for a song, basically. I mean, how much do you think they owe your family now?
A lot of money. They've made billions out of it. And my mother particularly, because I do know that Gerry renegotiated a deal, I think in the 90s, and he actually publicly said that he was doing very well. She actually has got very little, maybe the odd, you know, 100 quid or 200 quid. I mean, it's outrageous. She, you know, it's been stolen from her, and I want to get it back. But more importantly, I think I've got to stop this happening to women across the board in the creative arts. and create,
And do you think this is still going on today? Or a lot of these women who are contacting you, sort of looking at things retrospectively because that was the way things were done then? Or do you think the boys' club is still very much in force?
It's still happening now. And I mean, I've done a lot of work with women in the workplace over the last 20 years. I've written a lot about it, the glass ceiling at a certain age in the boardroom. So I do know about that aspect of it in business. But the creative industries is rife still. So I think we have to really do something about it.
And how receptive have ITV been to your movement? So they sort of sitting there wanting to get around the table and say, "You're right. We think there's an historic injustice," or
well,
they...
this is really extraordinary. First of all, I have to be careful what I say, apparently, because I've been told that if I say anything that isn't true, that they will have a go at me. So again, I feel I'm being bullied. We've actually, I know some of the papers have gone to them and asked them for a quote saying, we're very happy to talk, but in fact, that's not the case. They're happy to talk about credits only, and that I've got a letter to prove that. So, no, they're not. And I'd love them to come to the table and say to me, let's discuss this properly. And I mean, I'm a reasonable person, but no, actually. And I think, I'm getting feedback that they're saying some really weird things, quite undermining to me. So I would say they're not being very helpful at the moment.
I mean, we've got a statement from ITV. Of course, we had to do that. We had to speak to them. So we're going to tell you what they've said. A spokesman for ITV said ITV values our long-standing relationship with Dee Anderson and her family, and we have done everything asked of us by Dee to commemorate her mother's creative contribution. ITV has been engaged in a prolonged dialogue with Dee and her legal advisors over the course of the last 3 years, and to date, no legal claim has been put forward. At all times, we have sought to understand the basis for Dee's concerns, providing responses to her and her legal advisors, and we remain open to continuing this dialogue. Well, they don't sound like they're capitulating much, and it does seem to me, as you said, they mentioned about crediting your mother.
Yes.
This isn't about that, is it?
No, it's not.
It's about actually the financial rewards that she should have received.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not all about money, but that's important because it's the legacy and it's unfair. And also, the first part of that statement is completely untrue because what they've said is that I shouldn't be really having a go at them. I should be having a go at the Gerry Anderson estate. But as I said, many a disgruntled partner, but they have signed everything off. They've backed him. They've done everything, and they've got to take responsibility. They've got to stand up and say, okay, what can we do? How can we resolve this? But they're not doing that. So,
well, Dee, best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the studio to tell us your story.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, ITV, of course, we're not there to rebuff any of that, but we remain open channels to ITV if they want to come on and tell us their side of that story. Now, a man who spent more than 2 days trapped in a cave is said to be doing remarkably well. The experienced caver was in the Brecon Beacons where he fell on Saturday, suffering what's thought to be a broken jaw, leg and spinal injuries. His ordeal lasted 54 hours as team worked in shifts to bring him to the surface. More than 240 people were involved in the operation. Well, joining me now is Vice Chairman of the British Cave Rescue Council, Bill Whitehouse. Bill, what an extraordinary story. I mean, you must have been glued to this as it unfolded. Were you confident that cavers would be able to get him out alive?
Oh, yes, pretty confident. I mean, things can always go wrong, but there was a strong team there. They knew what they were doing. They were well skilled, well equipped, and they got on with the job. They knew the cave well and what was necessary to get this person out.
Is it normal? Was he do we know if he was caving in a group or was he a solo caver? And is it normal to do something that is, however experienced you are, there's always going to be a risk, isn't there? You can slip, you can fall, I should know. Is it sensible that people pursue these activities without someone, at least on the surface, waiting to see, if they're okay?
As I understand it, I mean, I wasn't there, but as I understand it, the guy who fell was within a party of, I think there were 3 of them. And so when he fell, one was able to stay with him, and one will have gone for help. So he wasn't on his own from that point of view. You're quite right. It's not a good idea to go caving on your own, because if something does happen, there's nobody there to help you and nobody to quickly raise the alarm to let know that something's gone wrong. And always, if people go caving anyway, they should always leave a message with friends as to where they're going, roughly, and what time they're expected to be out. I mean, cavers talk about their call-out time, and what they mean by that is, okay, we hope to be out by 7:30. If we're not out by 9 o'clock, then maybe somebody ought to raise an alert and do something about it.
This took 240 people involved in this man's rescue. That's a phenomenal amount of human resource. Why so many? Is this because cavers were going down in shifts and that sort of thing, and in investigating different parts of the cave network? I mean, 250 people is a lot.
Well, it was more than that. It's figures settling down at about 275 people. But remember, they weren't all there all weekend. There were people coming from other teams. There were 10 out of the 16 teams teams in the country represented on the rescue. So there were a lot of people coming in. And as you say, they were working shifts. They weren't all underground at the same time. There were parties going in, working a shift, and then coming out.
How common are accidents when it comes to caving? I mean, there have been some hugely high-profile cave rescues, and congratulations, actually, to the British team who did a sterling job when it came to that young football team in Thailand. But, of course, we've seen big accidents happen in mines in South America, in South Africa. When it comes to leisure caving, how common is it for people to get trapped?
Oh, it's not very common. I mean, caving gets a bit of a bad press for all the wrong reasons. It's not in itself a dangerous sport if you set about it correctly with the right equipment, the right knowledge, and you know where you're going, and so forth. I mean, I always reckon there's more risk of being hurt in a car accident on the way to the cave than there ever is in the cave. I mean, there are probably less than 50 call-outs a year to the 16 teams in the British Isles. And there'll be all sorts of things, a dog down a mine shaft, a missing person search, and all the rest of it. So the number of true caving accidents aren't that great. And some of them are quite small. Somebody got lost, somebody overdue and needs looking for. So a serious accident like this is pretty rare. I mean, what you've got to remember, though, of course, is if you slip over in the street and turn your ankle or break your ankle on the curb, they'll sit you down, make you comfortable until the ambulance arrives, and then off you go. If you do the same thing, have an accident and turn your ankle 2 miles underground, then it instantly becomes a lot more serious, because you aren't going to walk out on that, and you're going to need a lot of help to get you to the ambulance.
Bill, thank you so much for coming on, and a very brave man you are too. My dad's a caver, but I'm more worried about his drinking than his speleology, quite frankly. Bill Whitehouse there, Vice Chairman, British Cave Rescue Council. Well, let's go back to our big issue of the day, and we've spoken to a wide range of guests on our main topic, which is talking about online safety. Cybersecurity expert Philip Ingram spoke about the hidden meaning in adverts.
All of that doesn't happen by accident. It's being designed, and you came up with some of the phraseology that there is behind it, but the wider psychodemographic profiling that these platforms can do to really understand what someone's psyche is, can then very subtly be used to change people's beliefs, to change people's thinkings, and get them to do things that maybe if they were rational and not being influenced, they wouldn't do.
Well, Associate Professor and Cyber Psychology expert at Nottingham Trent University, Dr. Daria Kus, says social media does have a big impact on our mental health.
We are on social media on a regular basis. We're using technology in order to communicate, in order to engage with others, in order to do our shopping, to be entertained. We're using social media for any kinds of purposes. Technology use really has become the status quo, and I think we really need to understand it. It has become so deeply intertwined with our lives that we cannot imagine our lives without technology. And as a consequence, what we will see and what we are already seeing are a number of psychological impacts of technology use on our mental health and well-being.
Executive Director for the Age Verification Providers Association, Ian Corby, says we need to know the age of users of the internet.
The internet was never designed for children. So in order to preserve the freedoms of adults, but be able to protect children, the first thing we've got to do is figure out which users are adults and which are children. And so what age verification has grown up to do, originally focused mostly on the adult content industry, as you mentioned, but now increasingly, because of new laws that are coming through on GDPR, the data protection laws, and obviously the online safety bill, which we were just giving evidence this morning in Parliament about, there's a growing need generally to know the age or broad age range of users online.
Well, now it's time to hear what you, the viewers, have to say on online safety as we give you the final word. Do you think social media harms you? Joseph says unequivocally yes, particularly for young adults. Social media has become a platform for false success and happiness, which has had an untold negative impact on mental health. Mark says social media is the scourge of modern life. God, sound like people after my own heart here. It will eventually destroy civilization. Attaboy, that's the one. Ian says it harms everyone, but go for your interests that are and not negative topics. Don't let it control you. Chris says, it doesn't harm me. I don't care about social media. The people on here aren't my friends. My friends are down the pub. Good, go have a pint with them. Owen says, if it harms you, there is a solution. Put your device down, go outside and enjoy the nature on your doorstep. Couldn't agree more. Calvin says, no, not for me. I'm not a massive social media fan. I do, however, find it amusing reading the utter rubbish that the majority believe in. Well, thank you for all of your views. And finally, we put a poll up on Twitter where we asked, do you think online safety harms you? 76% of you said yes and 33% said no. So there you are. A whole 2/3 of you think that your social media activity is doing you some harm. So maybe listen to what some of the other viewers recommended. Turn the phone off, maybe delete an app or two. You might find it a liberating experience. I know that I did. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Join me again tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the delightful Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. I hope you have a fantastic evening, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Hello again. Clear spells will prevail across Scotland and Northern Ireland during the next 24 hours, albeit with further blustery showers in places. Generally cloudy and damp elsewhere across a large part of England and Wales because of this slow-moving cold front. It is a weakening feature, but it is bringing a lot of cloud, low cloud at that, and some outbreaks of rain and drizzle, whilst unstable westerlies affect Scotland and Northern Ireland. Showers at times and perhaps a more organised feature pushing through during the evening, first part of Wednesday, to bring some more prolonged showers. But that clears. Clear skies then for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst largely cloudy conditions stick around for England and Wales, away from the far southeast, which could see some clear spells. But mild for England and Wales as we start off Wednesday, albeit very gloomy. A lot of low cloud covering the hills and some persistent wet weather for parts of the southwest, Wales into the Midlands, East Anglia, Lincolnshire. That rain on and off through the day, I think, easing perhaps into the afternoon, but it's going to stay grey and overcast